The conditions for gardening have been somewhat atypical this season, but still there are many success stories from growers across the Northland. We'll share those with you and have valuable advice and tips from our resident experts straight ahead on this Harvest Moon edition of Great Gardening.
Every tree has a moment when it shines.
That's called moneywort or creeping Jenny.
You can go in and do a rejuvenating pruning.
Forage and feed for our native pollinator population.
A garden really gives you peace of mind.
Hello and welcome back to Great Gardening. I'm Pamela Fish. The harvest is well underway, and that means it's time for a review of the season. For that, we bring in our voices of experience, professional gardener and landscaper Tom Casper and horticulturist and educator Bob Olin. Guys, thanks for being here.
Our pleasure.
Now, this is our wrap-up for the season, yet as we've seen, the growing continues.
We hope this isn't the wrap-up because...
Well, it's our wrap-up on the
Right.
show, but yeah, a lot going on still.
Yeah, we got off to kind of a slow start there, I think atypical, but then what is typical, right? It seems like we're getting used to some really unusual conditions, and we hope for a nice, long, warm fall. That's what we need to finish things off now, Pam.
Certainly starting out that way.
Seems that way, and from what I've seen at least, there's no indication of frost, at least in the month of September, so hopefully it holds off a little longer.
Hooray for that. Okay. Yeah. Well, we also have with us our phone volunteers. Some of the master gardeners from St. Louis County are here to take your called-in questions. So please dial the number on your screen. They will get those questions to us for answers live here on the set. The people that we have been hearing from the last couple of weeks are from the farmers market, and we got out to survey area growers for their take on the 2017 season. So let's hear what they had to say.
Hi, I'm Sue Ann Dumke from Brill River Farm in Brill, Wisconsin, and we grow all of this fresh produce at our farm, wet and cool, and we're starting to notice that now. We have an advantage at our farm because we grow in high tunnels. So we've still had beautiful tomatoes, beautiful peppers, great cucumbers. The outside stuff has been pretty good. Our outside stuff is probably about 2 weeks behind where we usually are at this time. The good thing is this has been probably our lowest pest year. So things like early in the season, we weren't hit real hard with flea beetles.
My name is Ken Moen. We live in Foxborough, which is about 15 miles south of Superior. Potatoes started out great, but now they're downhill. It's just actually way too much water. Sounds good, but way too much water this year. It literally almost rots the crop. Some things did very well. Bumper tomato crop, just unbelievable. So, and squash. Squashes are doing tremendous this year. Every year the crops come in okay, but sometimes they just do extraordinary. Don't know why. It's honest to God truth.
I'm Eddie Gilmore, and it's Tiny Farm Duluth. I mainly grow microgreens, and primarily pea shoots. I do a spring in your step mix, pea, radish, sunflower, beets, carrots, turnips. I often will have like a big pile of radishes. I grow a lot of greens. We've gotten ample moisture. For the most part, it hasn't been too terribly hot. I'm growing close to Lake Superior, so my lettuce mix was stellar. Got a lot of great comments about that. I don't grow like 100 days to maturity type crops. I don't grow corn. I don't grow potatoes. You know, so yeah, I've been fine.
My name's Deb Shubat, and I am the sole farmer at Shubat's Fruits, which is my farm in French River. This year, we had so much rain, okay? Everybody knows that. And it had some bad effects and some good effects. The weeds did really well. Weeds were awesome, okay? I have a lot of apple scab on apples that never, ever have had scab. So it was very depressing to see that. But it also points out the trees that were actually immune to scab which is just glorious, actually. So it's good to have a test year like this so that you can see what actually is going on.
I'm Ginny Larva, and we're Mark's Shop and Garden, and we are from Floodwood, Minnesota. The cold crops have done very well, like the broccoli and the cabbage and so forth, but we definitely had a struggle with the rain. The cucumbers have not been producing as well. The carrot tomato season, I was surprised at the tomatoes and how long it took tomatoes to come in, and we haven't even seen the corn come in yet. You know, it's the end of August and still no corn at the market, so that is definitely a difference. You know, the trick is just plant a variety. Every year is different. Every year has its own little hiccups.
Well, that's the truth. Every year is different, and every year has little hiccups.
You said little hiccups. We could talk
Some
about
years
a
have
couple of
big
big hiccups.
Okay. But it's interesting because you've seen a lot of those issues, and yet there are differences depending on where you're growing and
Close to the lake,
what you're working
soil
with.
conditions, and rain was really variable within the region. So yeah.
Great deal of variability and a lot of good comments from our growers there in terms of exactly the type of year it was. It was a little different for everyone, but overall I would say that it was a little bit more challenging. It was, Deb had a good point there where it was kind of a good test year. Surprisingly on outdoor tomatoes, we found we went back to some of the original varieties that we used to recommend 5 and 10 years ago before we had this kind of warm spell, and those are the ones that shined this year and stood out. Some of the older varieties, the celebrities and the sun starts that people aren't talking so much about, but they looked real good this year.
Yeah.
And the vendors will remain at the farmers markets for a while. Now the Duluth, the Superior, there's one in Two Harbors.
Yeah, Two Harbors has a great little farmers market just north of town as well. So.
Okay.
And in the case of the Duluth Farmers Market, 14th Avenue East and 3rd Street, we will be open until the end of October, so Wednesday afternoons and Saturday mornings.
So go to your farmers markets and support those vendors. Okay, so let's look a little bit more at some of the conditions. Again, the weather was, pretty normal in May and June, maybe a little cool, but then July and August that's when we got hit with not so great weather.
You're right. Averages are so deceptive, and Tom and I were talking about this. If you recall, in May we had this beautiful, glorious first week in May when it was warm and there was a lot of field work that was done, and then I think it rained for 3 weeks. So it turned out to be an average May, but pretty wet and soggy at the end of the month, let me tell you.
Tom, you showed us some pictures of things that you saw throughout the season. We're going to start with
we're talking about some of the positives. Deb from the farmers market had mentioned weeds. Also lots of, on the positive, if folks are looking for butterflies, it's been a great season for butterflies and monarchs. That was the adult monarch, and here, of course, is the larvae of the monarch, the caterpillar, on a blood flower, which is the same family as milkweed. It's an annual variety. And then the less than positive, this is a slug. Certainly the largest slug I've ever seen, probably about 3 inches in length and about the thickness of a Sharpie pen. So interesting things going on.
Does that say escargot, or is this a pet, or what have we got here, Tom?
I'm not sure where it went.
Now, maybe the wet conditions contributed to that.
Absolutely. So
Certainly.
much of this was dictated, a lot of the disease issues were dictated by that. And again, the variability, I will agree that the weeds were awesome. The flowers, both perennial.
Well, we have some pictures, too, of some more things that happened. We call it the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I thank you for those titles, Bob. So let's start with the good, some beautiful flowers.
Well, Tom can chip in on this. I mean, both the annual and the perennial flowers were magnificent. Again, driven by the rainfall, and the farther north we get, the greater we see this. Nice combination here of colors, and these are all very common. Little Monarda there for you, Tom.
Yeah, nice picture,
and
Bob.
The daylilies look great, and the echinacea, of course, beautiful as well, and more daylilies. So it's just a beautiful year for some of the flowering perennial flowers.
Also good are cool season crops.
They did great. Ginny there from Floodwood mentioned the coal crops, and of course here we've got Murray Salzer from Barnum and his cauliflower, which is beautiful and just coming in. And Troy Stone again from that area. Look at that head of broccoli.
That's
the
a big
broccoli
one.
was tremendous. That's probably a 3 or 4 pound head. The cherry tomatoes, believe it or not, field run outdoors were very, very good. Some of the slicers outside gave us some trouble, but and here we've got the peppers. That was kind of an anomaly. It's a warm season crop. Set fruit early. The flowers got out and we got fruit on them, and there was tremendous pepper crops here. We got both Mike and Joyce Salzer and their pepper crop that was container grown, and tremendous production there. We talk about the bad. Now, someone said no problem with insects. I would agree up to a point, but these little guys, Colorado potato beetle, did a real nasty number, mainly because the winter was so mild and there was very little kill in the pupal form, and we had consequently quite a bit of insect pressure. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Tom?
Absolutely. Yeah, Colorado potato beetle, aphids, thrips, earwigs, you name it, there were problems with those.
Yeah, we
pests,
need a cold winter to get them a little bit under control. It was real interesting, the onset of disease on a lot of tomatoes, and I know a lot of folks did struggle with tomato production. It seemed to me that if you got in early, and that was the case here, and we got good fruit set, but that left the plant itself vulnerable to a lot of alternaria and anthracnose disease. Again, to reemphasize the weeds here, and that's pigweed out of control right there, and you don't want to
Sure
get you don't want to get lost in that garden plot.
And then one more tomato problem. We saw quite a bit of this.
We saw a lot of blossom end rot, not just on tomatoes, but on zucchini and other things. This is just really all the rain, particularly in container mixes where we're flushing all the soluble calcium down through the container, and some calcium deficiency that's led to a lot of blossom end rot.
Well, I was happy to see that the number of good pictures outweighed the bad and the ugly. So.
Always, and of course, and that's true of human nature and everything else, right?
That's right.
We're going to emphasize the positive, and we're not done yet. We're still optimistic about sweet corn, and optimistic about the squash and pumpkin crop, and optimistic about ripening more tomatoes.
That's right.
All right, I already have a stack of questions called in, so let's get started with those. Pam in Duluth plans to plant tulip and daffodil bulbs and wants to know, will I need to plant new bulbs each year?
Probably a good idea, especially if she's going with some of the hybrids or the new interesting big flowers. If she goes with species varieties, especially with daffodils, they will multiply and regenerate and develop new bulbs. But tulips, much more difficult to do that in our soil conditions. So my recommendation would be that each year to plan on planting some new ones to supplement the old ones in case they don't do as well as they have previous years. So.
Okay.
Good advice.
Great. Marion wants to know if I can put weed and feed on my lawn now.
Ooh, that's a good question. Absolutely. Remember, weed and feed's combination herbicide for broadleaf control as well as a fertilizer. It goes on right immediately after rain or after irrigation when you're moist, because the herbicide granules. Remember, you are applying an herbicide there, so if you're opposed to that, you want to stay with just some Fortis straight fertility. Weeds and feeds go on when the plants are wet, but not in a rain, and then straight fertilizer goes on when the plant is dry prior to a rain event.
All right. Tom John from Cloquet has a rose named Winnipeg and is wondering about cutting it down now. How far should I cut it, and should I cover it with straw?
More than likely Winnipeg Parks, which is an outstanding kind of a pinkish red colored blossom. And he really doesn't need to cut it down if he doesn't want to. It's not necessary, and it's pretty early to be doing that. Actually, right now, if he did that, he would probably stimulate some additional growth during this year, because we do still have some growing season left. So I would hold off and actually do it in the spring, and then cut down to new growth on the plant. So.
All right. Okay, we often get pictures with our questions. We have one now, and it is a fungus among us, as they say. But this is a tree fungus on a red maple. This woman, I didn't get her name, but she's just wondering what the heck to do about it. And
well, we're going to see a lot of fungal problems, a lot of shelf fungus. It would be kind of interesting. From what we could see from the tree, it doesn't seem to be impacting it too greatly. These fungi do live on the outer bark and should not be in it and impacting on the vascular tissue or the healthier tissue at this point. So probably not too much she needs to worry about.
all right. And we also have heard from a lot of people who've seen mushrooms. mushrooms
Very true.
everywhere. And There have been a glut of them, and of course the weather has contributed to that. We have a couple pictures that our Karen Sunderman gave to us. She saw someone harvesting these in Grand Marais, and they were called lobster mushrooms, and they eat these. And also on that trip, Karen came across what she was calling ghost flowers that we thought were mushrooms, but maybe these aren't a mushroom.
No,
They are they, Tom?
No, they're not a mushroom, and it's mistaken a lot because they actually look like they're coming from rotting tissue, but they're a non-chlorophyll producing plant, so they have that look, and they actually generate some of their chlorophyll or some of their growth from plants around them. So.
Yeah, these, if they don't have chlorophyll, they are all saprophytes. They're living on this dead, decaying organic material, and people want to know about control. And the reason we're seeing so many mushrooms, we get all this moisture, and that's accelerating the breakdown of a lot of organic material, wood material typically, that's down in the soil. That gets accelerated with these moist conditions. So the answer for control is not some kind of chemical. It's trying to actually accelerate this process. Even a little fall fertilizing will help break down the organic. You break down the organic, and mushrooms and other saprophytes like that can't live because they manufacture their own food. So it can be real heavy right now because of the rain, and chances are you won't see quite as many mushrooms the following season.
All right, we shall see.
We shall see.
Okay. No, not that I don't trust your information. I do know.
We'll see, Bob. We'll see.
No, great information, and we'll get back to more questions in just a bit. For tonight's tour, though, we take you to a farm and garden outside Ashland, Wisconsin that has been cared for by the same family for generations.
Well, we'd like to welcome everyone to our Nath Family Century Farm, and I'm David Nath, and this is my brother Paul.
Yes.
A century farm is a farm that has been in existence and in the family for 100 years. And it's officially recognized by the state of Wisconsin. We want to say rock gardens.
We call it a rock garden because we have so many rocks being used in different ways.
And all the rocks that we'll see were hauled by us from either a riverbed that's not too far away, the sandstone flat rocks that form the walkways.
They are like stepping stones. They actually serve as a kind of mulch. In the summertime, they help keep the ground on the cooler side. And actually, it keeps the need for weeding down.
Not to speak of the boulders and others that came from the fence lines along when our grandparents and father and uncles were clearing the land.
We mix annual plants with perennial plants and even shrubbery or conifers, dwarf trees. That is the dwarf Alberta spruce.
No longer dwarf.
Well, that one is about 30 years old. This one is the Canadian hemlock, and the nice thing I like about the Canadian hemlock is it's kind of a feathery foliage or branches that it has, and it's also, you can prune it and keep it at any height that you want it to be. We have a caragana. It's been there for probably about 20 years, so it isn't really a fast-growing tree. It has beautiful blossoms in the spring, which attract the bees.
That's another type of caragana or weeping pea. It has the yellow flowers and the peas, but here they're very, very small and dainty. And as Paul says, they are more wispy on this particular bush.
This variety of hydrangea is a very old variety. We've had it here for probably 40 years. We do have some grapevines that are coming in and mixing, and I kind of see it as an asset because it helps to hold up the Annabelle hydrangea plants.
Going back 30 or 40 years, a pool has been here of some type.
The sound of water is always so pleasing, and it adds another dimension to the setting.
It's a mugo pine that ordinarily would be grown up sky high already because it's been there a good number of years. I keep pruning away the top and trying to make it grow out laterally. This is a juniper that's called the gold strike. Very pleasant color to me, once again, because I like the contrast. And further back, we see another version of it that's called Mother Lode. And it happens to grow from there down to a second level and down to a third level. So it has a cascading effect from the pool. The barberries, these are new introductions over the last few years, and they always remain sort of in a small form.
We've kind of reserved the first row of the vegetable garden for perennials. We don't want to throw, when we either divide or move our perennials from the flower garden, we don't want to throw them out. This variety of kohlrabi is a very good keeper. It's not the usual early spring varieties. It has a nice big bulb. We have them covered with wire because the deer love them.
We see a number of tomato plants through here, a number of cucumbers over here, a little bit of lettuce on the far side. It's the second crop that I'm growing now. This is the front of the house, and way back in 1928, the president, trying to think, Calvin Coolidge, when he was at Brule on the Brule River, made a trip to Ashland and to Bayfield. And when he went by, my uncle was out in the hayfield at that particular time, and he said he waved to the president, and the president waved back.
That was a really big deal for that day, I guess.
And a little history as well.
What a great tour by these guys. Wow.
Yeah, we're going to, in fact, hear more from Paul and David coming up a little bit later. They had so much to show us, but it was a lot of fun seeing their place in Eileen Town or Township just outside of Ashland.
Gardening and laughing go together.
Yeah,
they do.
we might just say, and we really appreciate it, that shows you just the tremendous amount of interest and in-depth experience and the joy that can come from gardening. But for a lot of our listeners and viewers on the north side of the lake, there are a few items there that probably are not going to be quite hardy on the north side, so we can't always expect to do quite as well as these gentlemen have done.
Is that why some of our gardens don't look as fabulous?
Speak for yourself now.
They look great, just a little bit different plant material.
Pam lives in that area. Hers don't look like.
She moved east.
Just starting there. All right, some more questions from our viewers. Marie in Gordon has blueberry bushes that are 5 years old and wants to move them. When's the best time, and also how far back can I prune them?
Oh, that's a good question. Best time, let them go right into the fall, move them next spring prior to breaking bud. Let's look at about the third week in April would be great as soon as the frost's out. And we hear a lot about pruning back top stock. I just wouldn't get too aggressive that way. I think they're a very shallow-rooted plant, and she's going to be getting most of the roots. So prune them back a little bit, particularly if there's any possible winter damage, but don't get very aggressive in pruning back the top stock.
All right. Kathy from Rice Lake Township has a beautiful hydrangea that had a few blossoms and flowers this year, but is wondering what she can do to have more next year.
Well, again, it's so varietal, and a lot of folks have dealt with the blue one or endless summer and the inconsistency of the bloom, and years where it has outstanding blooms, and then it goes for several years without any blooms, and seeing folks even within gardens where one of them is doing well and the other one isn't. It's sort of one of those life's mysteries, but certainly fertilizing it in the spring and following up a few weeks later with an aluminum sulfate kind of thing will help with that. So.
And when do we prune them, or does that depend?
That depends on the variety, but certainly the blue ones generally die down to the ground, so you can cut them down in the fall or early in the spring. So.
You know, Tom, some of these are becoming so popular, and we've seen it. One thing that we observed in a couple of our tours is some of these, and particularly the original Endless Summer, seems as if it's a little bit stressed, and that would be consistent with moving from the juveniles to the more mature form or where we're blossoming. So maybe not quite as much fertility to trigger the bloom after the plant's gotten established. And we've seen it in somewhat shaded and protected areas where we're seeing more bloom. So it's very possible that a little bit of stress will help trigger some of that bloom.
Well, speaking of which, Judy from Lakeside has a blue endless summer hydrangea, and it has large leaves but no blossoms this year.
Same thing.
Let's give that a little bit of a try. I think if sometimes you need a pore site, and it seems like that triggers this blooming process. But don't give up on them. We've seen them do extremely well in this area. Then we've seen them bloomless in other locations for a number of years. So.
And I know my endless summer took 3 years to come to bloom again, I think. Yeah. So.
And what people should be aware, that was the original. Endless Summer is now a series, and that name is the name was so great that you're going to see a lot of Endless Summer in this series that are other varieties,
right.
Many of which actually bloom much more consistently.
Okay. Barb from Hawthorne wants to know if lupin can be transplanted before winter, and is wondering, can I mow them without damaging them?
Ideally, she would be better off just harvesting seeds if the seed pods are still intact. It is very easy to seed or even letting the seeds where they land go for the winter and then germinate in the spring. But she certainly can, as it's dying down, weed whack it or mow it without any damage to the plant.
And they'll come back.
And I think maybe this is a plant where we have to be a little bit careful because it's almost gotten to that point where it's invasive in some areas.
Right.
So it's beautiful, but be a little careful how we're spreading some of that seed.
Be careful what she wishes for.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. They do spread, yeah, certainly seen that. We also have a question with a couple of pictures, and these come from Alroy, who we know here at PBS North. Alroy's been a longtime employee, lives just outside of Duluth, but has some trouble with the birch, the leaves becoming brown. What's going on there?
Well, that one's pretty easier. That is birch leaf minor, and its namesake just indicates it's mined out all the tissue between the upper and the lower leaf area there, and we're getting kind of this translucent effect. We can get 2 and 3 generations in a year, but typically we'll see that, again, it's a fly that would appear early in the season, deposits the egg, it's the larvae that mines that out. Generally doesn't hurt the tree, don't recommend control. You would almost have to, if you feel positive about controlling, use some kind of a systemic to get a product that will control that larvae.
But there's also this, the dogwood with the browning leaves and
different.
holes in the leaves.
And that looks like beetle damage or flea beetle damage, and potentially even a little bit of leaf miner of some sort as well. You can see the veining and clearing of the leaves, so probably a couple of problems there on the dogwood. Again, same kind of thing, probably not detrimental to the shrub, and wouldn't recommend any kind of control for it.
Okay.
So.
You know, it was such an interesting year because we heard the comment earlier about not an insect problem. It's true, we didn't see much potential damage on the cabbage family. The loopers and the imported cabbage worm weren't too much of a problem, but some of the other insects seemed to flourish, didn't they, Tom?
Absolutely.
All right. We'll have more questions coming up. Remember, this is an hour-long show, so you guys keep those thinking hats on. But gardening really can be for everyone, and at one of the newest community gardens in the city of Duluth, we found one cultivated space that is serving a host of community needs.
I'm Emily Ritchie, and I'm the director of the Duluth Community Garden Program. The Garden Program is a nonprofit organization that's been around for 40 years now. We were founded in 1977. This is the Harrison Park Garden. This was built last fall, so in the fall of 2016, and then just rented out for the first time this year. I think there are 13 garden plots here. When we were building this last year, we got lots and lots of questions of like, what are you doing? What's happening? Can I rent a garden? How do I do that? And that's what's happened. So this garden filled up really quickly. You know, for folks who might live in an apartment or have a really shady yard, this is a great way for them to get outside and grow some food. We also provide all of the resources and materials that they might need to do the gardening. So, and then we're also working closely with the Lincoln Park Children and Families Collaborative. So they help design the space and helped with some funding, things like that. So they have a garden here. They shaped the garden like a turtle that's pointing in the cardinal directions. And then they're growing plants that are significant to Anishinaabe culture and then also have a medicinal use. So there's sage in there, they're growing tobacco, there's strawberries and blueberries and some cedar trees. Yeah, it's a cool way to bring, you know, food and medicine and culture and history and all of these things together in one space. We've got a couple really long-time gardeners that are excited to get their hands back in the dirt, but then also some new folks too. Candy, who has this garden, she lives in a high-rise apartment and is in a wheelchair, and loves to garden, and she's doing it. She's doing wonderfully. So this is what has made this possible for her. So that's really cool. And yeah, we've got a couple of families who are gardening here, so that's always exciting when you can get kids out. And then, other just individuals or couples. So there's a lot of food being grown here, which is great.
Duluth Community Garden Program's been around for 40 years. 40 years, yeah. And recently they've been doing this vegetable of the year. This year it's the onion.
Yeah.
And so we went to Bending Birches, Tom's place, early in the season, and Jan showed us how they were grown from seed. And here are the results.
Yeah, here's a few of them. Of course, this is Bob's Walla Walla onion, but a few of them that were grown from seed that we were growing and folks were buying. This is the long red Florence.
Can you pull that out for us?
Yep.
Take a look at it. Ooh,
Isn't that beautiful?
pretty.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that's an Italian heirloom. It's a red onion, very, very nice for cooking. And we've got King Richard, which is a summer leek. Again, in the onion family, beautiful opportunity to cook with that. And then we also have some scallions tucked in here, Summer Island, which is a green onion or a scallion. Again, hearing from folks that were growing onions as well as a lot of other things, kind of mixed results depending on where you're at, when you got them in. A few of these were planted a little late or later, still producing, and we still have some growing time, so they'll continue to flourish. So.
Yeah, onions I think are very slow growing, and a lot of those we started from seed March 1st or the end of February and transplanted a couple of times, so it does take quite a while to really get some good large onions.
Yeah. All right. More questions?
But the great thing is these onions have filled this entire studio with
That's right.
I love onions and I love garlic. You guys might have noticed that over the years as we sit across from each other.
Fans.
But yeah, in fact, I bought some at the Superior Farmers Market, some garlic that was huge and delicious. So it did well over that way.
We'll point this out. These are locally grown garlic, since we're talking about garlic that really did grow well this year. That's another crop that was extremely successful during this moist growing season.
Okay, good. And those are replanted soon?
Yeah, not too soon.
Okay.
Mid-October.
Mid-October. Okay. All right. Okay, Andy from Carlton wants to know about his tomatoes. They are large, but they're still green, and he's wondering, is there a way to speed up ripening, or should they be picked green?
Here's my thought on the whole process. As long as you have a green plant and there's no threat of frost, let's let them go, because it's the green plant that's actually producing the sugars. Once you get to a green mature point where that color's gone from a deep green to a very light green, almost a yellow, at that point you can harvest. No more sugar is being produced, but you can ripen them up, and the key there is temperature, 70 degrees, 24 hours a day, and you don't have to worry about light or no light or wrapping them or under the bed. It's just temperature that really triggers that ripening process.
So ideally, keeping them on the plant as long as possible.
Yeah, you want them vine ripened. If you got a green plant and no frost, let's leave them on there. That's where the sugars are produced by the green leafy tissue, not by sitting in the house under the bed. So we really want that sugar being produced.
We now know where Bob hides his
Oh yeah.
All right, Linda from Duluth.
But it works, Tom.
It works.
That's right.
Beautiful, Bob.
Did
I
a
have
nice
one.
job. How can I get rid of comfrey? And it has taken over, and the new plants keep popping up. First, let's tell people what that is.
Comfrey is an herb, basically, and it's a very aggressive herb and deep-rooted, difficult to control, difficult to get under control, and does not react well to chemical treatment. So ideally, if she can continue to dig it out and remove it as much as possible over time, like a lot of our other weeds, if we keep after them, it will diminish its strength, and over time, a couple of years of working with it, she will be able to eliminate it. So, but it's hard work, and there isn't a magic spray or something like that you can use to get rid of it. So,
You know, that's so well said. I think that weeds are real tough competitors, whatever you're growing, and I think, but it is a process of continuing over time and continuing to work at eliminating all the seed. You don't want to let anything go to seed if at all possible, and then working it on a regular basis.
All right, Lynn from Lakewood Township has 2 cedar trees that are side by side and are turning rust colored. Is this normal or are they in trouble?
my guess is more than likely, and Bob can weigh in, but my guess is more than likely what she's seeing is the inner growth of the cedar tree, which is the 3rd year or 3-year-old growth. This time of year, we'll be seeing that in our pine trees and our spruce trees and in all of our evergreens where that oldest growth is now starting to die off. It's pretty normal. Now, if the entire plant is turning rust color, it's not. It's some other condition going on. But if it's the inner growth of it, deep inside of the outer evergreen growth, it's more than likely just that 3rd year growth.
We have a similar question from Kathy in Proctor about her white pine turning yellow and what might be causing this, and will the white pine next to it be affected?
You know, again, it could be the fact, you know, these are leaves. They just don't get shed every year, the needles are, and there's going to be a needle drop that is in fact occurring. We know for one thing, the drying isn't because it's been too dry this year, you know, so it might in some cases be the opposite. White pine, we always get these red flags. There is a blister rust that can attack younger pine, and that's a possibility. We don't have any good controls. Fungal disease again, and if people are setting out white pine, we recommend just plant plenty. You're at this point still going to lose a few to the blister rust, and that's a possibility in that case if the others look good.
All right. Okay, so we'll have more questions coming up, but since our last program in June, we've been collecting photos from enthusiastic gardeners across the Northland. Here's tonight's Grow and Show. Mid-June in Solon Springs was a lush time for Jerry Schindler, as evidenced by these pictures of his thriving vegetable garden there. The Schindlers were optimistic they'd enjoy a bounty of veggies come harvest time. Their peonies and early to mid-season flowers came on strong as well. They especially enjoyed the full double blooms of their vivid pink peonies. In Barnes, Wisconsin, Judy and Lanny Nider found a springtime surprise when a newborn fawn appeared in the garden under their kitchen window. Judy got this picture through the glass. The Niders say the fawn spent some time testing its wobbly legs, waiting for Mom, but seemed to find comfort in its bed among the hostas and ferns until Mama Deer returned that night. Phyllis Lorenzo of Hayward comments on how beautiful the colors are this season and shares a favorite dazzling lily as one fine example. Dorothy Harrison of Duluth would have to agree. She says they've never seen their stargazer lily bloom as bright or voluminous as it has this summer. If you have pictures of garden fare to share, please send them to greatgardening@wdse.org and let us show what you grow. All right, thanks for those, and please keep sending them in. We do have a few more that we're going to share later this hour, but right now we want to talk about how growing vivid colored vegetables is a growing trend, and with good reason, right, Bob? Here's some that you shared with us.
Yeah, this is, we got several deep purple varieties, and this is that anthocyanin that they're talking about. This is the antioxidant that's in blueberries, and we're seeing it being cultivated and selected in all kinds of different vegetables. Here it's in peppers, the varieties Islander. We've got it, here we have it in purple kohlrabi, one of our growers from the Hibbing area. And a lot of these are naturally occurring. Here it's in basil, the purple basil, which adds so much, but this is the strong antioxidant. And we're seeing it, this will become a little bit more purple, but we're seeing it in, this is purple bumblebee, again in several potato varieties. And then of course,
this is our chef on the set.
Yeah.
Bob Olin put this together. It looks delicious.
I can't wait till after the show to eat that.
that was breakfast, which came off the back of the truck, Tom. But I did bring this for Tom. You know, Tom and I kind of color coordinate our fashions.
I noticed you've done that.
Tom knew that this was going to be. So these are one of the purple varieties. So he wore his shirt just for
in honor of the purple potato.
Yes, indeed.
That is now when you cook it. Does it still stay that purple?
In this case, because there's so much anthocyanin, it definitely does retain its purple color. In the case of some of our purple beans, they wash out and we get a very vivid green.
Right.
The purple breaks down and the chlorophyll shines through. But in the case of many of these varieties, they do retain that purple anthocyanin, and they retain the good nutrition. They are in fact more nutritious than other white varieties, and they were the natural varieties, the heirloom varieties. We started to select for the white varieties for higher yield, higher production, higher starch content, better French fries. This is what nature really wanted initially.
French fries, yay. I love that. Okay, let's get to a few more questions before we move on. Can you give me some suggestions on how to stop squirrels from digging up my tulip bulbs? I keep buying them but never get to enjoy them. That's from Nikki in Duluth.
A couple of things I would suggest. You can use bone meal, blood meal kind of thing, sprinkling it over after you've planted them. That sometimes works as a deterrent if they are continuing to be a problem. I've talked to folks about actually when they're planting their tulip bulbs is to cut a piece of chicken wire and put it over the top of the bulb so the squirrels can't dig through that. They can bury that down 4 inches down in the soil. Squirrels can't get it. Those are the non-squirrel threatening kinds of activities. You can take it up from there.
You know, Tom's absolutely right, but you might consider hardware cloth, which is a 1/4 inch square and really tough that won't rust out on you either, right on top of the bulb bed that's planted. And that may be the most surefire way.
Ruth in Proctor wants to know if it's okay to put straw in a plastic bag and mulch with the bags rather than putting the loose straw in the garden.
Sure, but you know, the nice thing about straw is we've got these air chambers within the shaft of the straw, so we're not gaining a whole lot here because it's going to repel the water, so why are we going to bother? We really want to get something that would mat like leaves and needles and other things where we don't have this natural air chambers in the material itself. So I don't see a big advantage really in putting the straw in the bags. A lot of other things from leaves, the clippings, things that would mat should go in the bags.
I have heard from people, though, who don't like cleaning all the straw out in the spring.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what she's asking is for spring cleanup. Pulling those bags off is much easier than trying to get all of that straw out of the garden. But
what I like to do is, if you take the straw and you work it down, then you've got a natural mulch for weed control. So there's another thought. So you're not going to necessarily remove all the straw. We're going to pull it off, work it in, gradually decomposes and adds to the overall till. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, but yeah, bag it up if you like.
One more quick question. Dave from Duluth has a French lilac. Can I cut it down now, and how far?
He certainly could cut it down now. He's going to lose the blossoms for next year at the minimum if he does that. So if he's not concerned about the blossoms and needs to get it cut, can do that now. It will recover just fine from it, but may take a few years before it blooms again.
Okay. Now, as promised, we return to the farm of 2 longtime gardeners and brothers near Ashland, Wisconsin.
This is our dry riverbed. We call it the wadi because that's an Arabic word that expresses the same meaning. This we made because at one time there was a little small culvert that went through this roadway, formed a ditch across here, a swamp, and then out to the highway. So we decided that we were going to do it up a little bit. We had it excavated. We had it lined with a plastic membrane to keep the weeds and any type of grasses to come through. A good coating of the small pebbles or rocks. And then of course the other types of larger rocks that were set in place.
It's a way to move the excess moisture from the area. Yes, so we just accentuated it and made it a little more pronounced. The phlox are beginning to come into bloom.
We have some of our nice showy annuals that are growing on the far side, and those orange and white ones are a type of an impatient which they call the sun patient because it is fully adaptable to the sun, and I might say the more sun, the more beauty there is. What you see in the background are a few cone flowers that I'm also interested in this year, the double type in particular. Down here we have a couple other white swan single type of cone flowers. There's another one of those cone flowers. This one here is called the mandarin. That's one of my favorite of the cone flowers, hot papaya. This is one that's called marmalade, and one back there that's called butterfly kisses. that one there is one of those supreme cantaloupes. It's just beginning to get its double layer in the middle there.
That is Red Sensation.
Red Sensation,
This
yes.
one here.
It's, this type is called the mophead type of hydrangea. And one of our beautiful hydrangeas again, this one here is called Cherry Explosion. I guess they call it the lace variety because the petals and the florets form around a center area, a little lighter in color. Here's another hydrangea here that's called Blushing Bride. It's a new one for us again. This is a beautiful one because it's a very scintillating blue in my opinion. It's a campanula conglomerata. It's not all that long lasting, but when it is blooming, it's gorgeous. That little white one there is the one that the rabbits like. They're a campanula as well. We have the Rudbeckia, the gold stem daisy that's beginning to bloom in this area. Alongside is a kind of a not necessarily hardy Shasta daisy, the double variety, but I'm only hoping that I can save it. And I have had luck in the past with a number of these more complicated, beautiful, multiple petaled and colorful daisies of that kind.
If you mulch them, you have a better chance for survival.
That's right.
There is no perfect way to do it. We are learning, even though it's a lifetime thing. We are learning, and trial and error is the best way to do it.
We love visiting their gardens in Century Farm. It was a lot of fun to be
Paul
out
and
there.
David, great gardeners.
Yeah.
And
Just like the
passionate.
show.
And like you said, always learning as we all are, except for Tom. You got that?
Obviously, they've learned a lot, too.
Yeah, we're all learning and continuing, which is the fun part of this.
Indeed. Okay, a couple more questions before we move on. Let's see. BJ from Duluth has a lot of berries in her strawberry patch that were misshapen and tiny. What might have happened there?
Oh, I hate to tell you, that's Lignus bug or tarnish plant beetle. So once again, an indication where some insects were light, others were very heavy. Difficult pest to control. Attacks the blossom right when it's beginning to set, and consequently, as it unfolds, you don't get good fertilization, you don't get good fruit development. Very difficult to control without the use of some type of a synthetic insecticide.
Pretty easy to identify too. They got like a little, almost a triangle on their back. So if she sees beetles in her garden that are normal sized beetle, but has almost a triangle shape on its back, and it's kind of a coppery brown color.
Yeah, it's a true bug. That's that triangular shape.
Yeah.
Randy from Hayward says his PJM rhododendron grows well but never produces any buds.
My guess is almost it might be a deer problem or something like that, where something's grazing those buds just as they're developing. Because really, PJM is a very consistent bloomer. And
the only other thing, he's got to pull soil test and determine the pH. Let's get that pH down about 4.5.
All right. And Jenna from Zim says, why did flowers grow so tall this year up in Zim?
Because it's farther north than the rest of us. Now the folks in Zim are going to give us another reason. It's just the magic of that particular community. But actually, every few degrees in latitude that you move farther north, and this year I think it was that combination of all the moisture, the longer day length, and probably some of those overcast days where we got this stretch that occurred.
reaching for the light.
All right. Well, across a 3-state area, we have folks sharing photos of the pride of their gardens so that we, in turn, can share those pictures with you.
This allium sprouted its intense purple tendrils in the gardens of Robin Trinko Russell on Madeline Island, attracting pollinators like this bumblebee. Robin also spotted a monarch butterfly resting its wings among her plantings earlier this summer. A fine selection of hydrangeas delight the eye in the gardens of Lena Constantini in Ironwood, Michigan, including the Blue Wave, the Bobo, Incrediball, the Limelight Hydrangea, and Vanilla Strawberry. Lena also shares shots of her pink peonies offset by daylilies and lupins. The balloon flowers are abloom with an array of light-colored herbs and flowers. A monarch sits atop an allium, while the vibrant coneflower attracts a hungry bee. And the hens and chicks burst forth with flowers of bright pink spikes. Do you have prized pictures of favorite plants or flowers? We'd love to see them and share them on our show.
Yes, please keep sending those pictures in. We get them from all over, from, like I said, a 3-state area, Upper Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, all across the area.
And all equally magnificent.
Yeah.
It's just very
Beautiful, beautiful pictures.
It appears that there's a lot of people gardening.
You think
You think so? Yeah.
you folks watching the show too, maybe.
Yeah.
Gardening is the thing. Well, Patty from Duluth has beautiful big bell peppers, but something bored a hole about 1/4 inch into them. What is it, and how do I prevent that next year?
You know, we'd really like to see the pepper to see if it's actually insect, and we'd be looking at one of the beetles, possibly, but we're also seeing areas where there was other kind of mechanical damage, or if it's on the lower portion, we're actually seeing some rot set in with all the moisture we've seen. So we may not be able to blame an insect. We'd like to take a look at the actual fruit.
Potentially slug damage too. They may be getting up onto the peppers and doing that kind of thing. So
I hate to admit it, but here's one of my peppers that I'm proud of it from this side, not very proud from this side. But again, it's not insect damage.
So what is it?
This
It's
is mechanical damage, and then with all the moisture that we've had, it rot set in pretty quickly.
Sure. Okay. Let's
still
see.
nice, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Half
it
of it
is.
is 3/4 of it.
It is still a nice pepper.
This is good.
I get the right side.
Yes.
Carol from I don't know where planted 3 flame willows in 2012. Moist area, no standing water, full sun. The leaves this year are curling, turning brown. Looks like the trees are dying.
Yeah, seen that a lot with willows and a lot of fungus on them. More than likely, it's going to be okay, and it's just kind of a product of the year we've had. If she sees some dieback, flame willows are very, very responsive to heavy pruning. So if she needs to, going in next spring, cutting them to the ground, and she should see a lot of new growth. So
Great. Okay. Chris from Saginaw has 3 lingonberry plants that look healthy, have some flowers, but get no fruit. And they are planted in acidic soil.
Okay, she's doing well. Again, we'd like to see 2 varieties at a minimum, so we get some good pollen movement and good fertilization that's occurring. So I would say let's find another variety and mix them in.
Lyle in East Duluth wants to know how he can attract more hummingbirds. Possibly a quartet or a choir of them, please.
Well, we've talked about it for quite a few years. Really, one of the best plants for attracting hummingbirds is bee balm, and lots of different colors and lots of staged or different times of blooming depending on varieties. So certainly planting that would be one of my first recommendations to Lyle, and letting that go. The bee balm that I had planted this year, there were as many as 6 or 7 hummingbirds on it at one time.
So you did get a choir of them.
I had a choir.
Indeed.
Yes.
All right. Betty from Maple, Wisconsin wants to know what apple trees are immune to scab. And also she has a question about morning glories with lots of green but no flowers.
You know, good questions there, really. And I can't pull varieties off the top of my head, in all honesty there. If we're talking about edibles, we are seeing a lot of the ornamentals that are being selected. You have to be, again, careful, because so many of these are zone 4. If you're up over the hill, zone 3, or some of our other areas, I've not seen a lot of scab resistance in zone 3 varieties, more in many of the new introductions in zone 4.
Okay. All right.
And morning glory without a lot of blooms. Again, part of that weather conditions, we haven't had a lot of heat. It likes a lot of heat and a lot of sunlight, so if they're planted in a little bit of shade, not going to see as many blooms. But be patient, there's still some time left, and it should bloom next year. If it's too shady, plant it in a spot where more sunlight.
Okay, excellent. Well, the season may be winding down, but the work is ramping up because not only is it the time to bring in the harvest, it's also time to prepare for winter, and here are just some of the fall chores to be done.
All right, I get the first one. Cut back most of your perennials, and certainly where we're seeing a year like this, where we're seeing a lot of insect and disease damage, getting a good cleanup this fall, and potentially disposing of that off-site at the sanitary district's compost site, or somewhere where you have less of a chance of that stuff coming back. So.
Tom, can I just, yeah, that's absolutely right. Let's get all that foliage off. Sometimes we say you can wait till spring, but we want that soil exposed. We want some cold penetration to cut our insect populations down.
Yeah.
And we want to plant and transplant trees now and keep watering them for a while.
Right, I think you want to, we probably have plenty of moisture. Be a little careful, particularly on heavy soils. You can drown these. Remember, coming into the fall is the one time you get new deciduous trees in. We want to get them staked. We don't want them to pop out. So be the one time and leave those stakes on maybe in the next year and then take them out.
All right, rake and remove leaves. Good time to do that in the fall, especially as we start to see more and more of these mold issues showing up in our lawns and things like that. So shred for mulch or compost, get those leaves off as they're falling and good cleanup.
Get the bulbs in the ground.
Spring flowering bulbs, we don't want to go too early. We're looking at October there, maybe mid-October even when we want to get those planted.
Yeah. Okay. Protecting from cold and wind, wrapping those newly planted trees. Burlap if you're dealing with issues, whether it's four-legged damage or from the cold. Is a good thing as well. So.
All right, and we talked about feeding and seeding the lawns.
We did touch on that. Fertilize right now, no fertility if you're seeding. You leave all that fertility away. You can always sod right up until the snow flies.
Okay, before we end, we want to take a look at what's coming up starting early next spring on Great Gardening.
Next season on Great Gardening, we take you to a garden in Cotton where dozens of different dahlias are planted each year for late summer enjoyment. Just outside of Duluth, a straw bale gardener offers an overview of lessons learned from growing vegetables in his above-ground environment over the last few years. A local scholar of the art of bonsai shares his insights and expertise in the care of the tiny trees and plantings that are grown in containers. We'll see what food is being grown nearby for area restaurants and retreats. And we'll take you on a tour to home gardens across the region, including some beautiful lakeside landscapes. Plus, as always, a bushel basket of expert advice for you each week from Tom and Bob on the 2018 season of Great Gardening, beginning next March.
Before that, we have an event coming up in October, Bob, Fall Garden Fest.
26th, the Onion Celebrity Chef Contest, the whole thing. More details up on your website, right?
That's right. Our website is there, wdse.org, and there's lots of information and past episodes of our show. Gosh, I apologize for all the questions we didn't get to, but starting in March, we'll save those and try and get them answered on the air. But that's going to do it for this Harvest Moon edition of Great Gardening. We will be back on the set March 8th. Until then, ginormous thank you to you, Bob and Tom. You guys are the best. Great information.
She must be an English major.
Thanks to our dedicated phone volunteers as well from St. Louis County Master Gardeners, and to all of you who called in and tuned in. From all of us here at Great Gardening, thank you for watching and enjoy the garden.